Howdy, my name is Dave Husband, and I model the Wilmington and Northern branch of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad in the 1900 to 1905 era. The Wilmington and Northern branch was built as an independent railroad in the 1870s to run between Wilmington, Delaware and Reading, Pennsylvania. It was an independent railroad until 1895, when it was leased by the Philadelphia and Reading and then purchased outright in 1900. I chose to model the 1900 to 1905 era because the majority of cars would have had air brakes and knuckle couplers. But it is early enough that I could still have a few W&N cars floating around. One of my tasks to successfully model the Wilmington and Northern branch was to figure out what fleet of cars I needed to have to accurately portray the railroad in that era. This video will describe part of my journey towards that goal.
One of the best finds that I made was discovering that Google Books had digitized the annual reports for the Wilmington and Northern Railroad from the 1870s to 1895 when it was leased by the Philadelphia and Reading. It was a huge treasure trove of information. Included in the reports was a monthly breakdown of tonnage by commodity carried by the W&N. Over the course of several years, it appeared that the peak month was October, so I set my layout in October. The added benefit is it allowed me to do fall scenery, which I really wanted to do. Based on the commodities, it was obvious I was going to need a lot of open-top cars, but how many, what types? Looking at the top commodities hauled and their tonnage, I entered what general types of cars hauled those commodities, and then estimated the tonnage that each type of car would carry. For bulk commodities, I figured that the car would be loaded at near full capacity, which for the time was 20 to 25 tons, somewhere in there. And then looking at the other commodities, I figured that they would generally be a little bit less than the full capacity of the car. So estimated somewhere in the 10 to 15 tons. That allowed me to estimate how many cars of each commodity were handled by per month and per day. And for every load, there's an empty. So that gave me the total number of cars handled, which, based on the other information that I had, was pretty much right in the ballpark. Obviously, I'm going to use a lot of gondolas and hoppers on my layout. So let's look at how I developed my hopper and gon fleet.
Once again, fortune smiled on me, and I found two excellent volumes of books by Eric Neubauer with the rosters of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad from the 1800s to 1914. These books have pictures, plans, drawings, all sorts of information that I would need to plan out what classes of cars were around in my era. Looking at it, I was able to see what breakdown of open-top cars were in the P&R fleet by class. The P&R had a wide variety of gondolas in use at the time. They had high side gondolas, drop bottom gondolas, low side gondolas, primarily for mill products, hopper bottom gondolas that were the primary coal car and used for other bulk commodities. In addition, at the end of my era, they were acquiring some true hopper cars that I'll have to include also. From Neubauer, I was able to develop a breakdown of the fleet for 1903, which was my target year.
I summarized the classes of cars from Neubauer and broke them down in this the chart by the gondolas, mill gondolas, the cars I still need to have, and then the hopper cars. Let's start with the mill gondolas. The biggest group of mill gons, class GHA, shared side stake patterns with two other cars, the GMA and the HSA hopper bottom gons. Many of these early P&R gons are what I call skinny gons, being only about 7.5 feet wide, while most of the other gons were in the 8 to 9 foot range. Because these cars all had the same side stake patterns and end patterns, I made some masters and made my own resin castings for those classes of cars. The GHA was the base 4-board high side gon. The GMA gon was a mill gon with low sides, which were very popular with the P&R. I cut the top 3 boards off the side castings to make those. I also cast some gon shells to fit on an MDC 36-foot cast metal underframe. I used the 3 and 4 board heights for other roads gons, but the shells cut down to 1 board high are perfect for the P&R class GMB gondola. These low-sided mill gons were very popular on the P&R, and they had multiple classes of them. The P&R, ever progressive, was also using some steel cars in my era. The GMD was a low-side gon design rendered in steel. I used the middle of an Athearn 50-foot gon shell, cut it down to fit an MDC metal underframe, and made my model of a class GMD low-side steel gon. I do have one class GHB composite gon from Finero and Camerlengo resin kits. It's actually a bit too new for my era, so I haven't included in the totals. Since it is basically the same design as the class GAB, which the Reading had a lot of, the difference being the GAB is 34 feet long and the GHB is 36 feet long, I felt it an acceptable compromise. This brings us to the classes I haven't tackled yet. Class GAB is an era-appropriate 34-foot composite gon. It's not produced commercially, so I will have to scratch build it and make my own resin castings for it. The class GM is really a catch-all of miscellaneous classes for the predecessor roads, so it's a mismatch of cars that is poorly documented. Haven't tackled it yet. I do have some models of Wilmington and Northern gons that would fit into this class. Class GAC is also era appropriate. It's now available as a 3D print from Shapeways, produced by Forbes Models, so there are a couple of those in my future plans. In addition, there's a new resin kit of class GHH from Finero and Camerlengo. It's a steel underframe gon. While a bit out of my era, it is a P&R design, so one might accidentally appear on the layout.
That covers the Milgon fleet from my era. But there were more cars. There were the hopper bottom gondolas and hopper cars. On the Philadelphia and Reading, which was typical of Eastern cars in that time, most of the coal and bulk commodity cars were hopper bottom gondolas. They were a gondola car that had a hopper in the middle of the car, either a single or twin hopper bottom, but had flat floors on the ends of the cars. The advantage of that was that in the off seasons for coal hauling, they could be used to haul lumber, mill products, and other stuff that a normal gondola would handle.
The two biggest classes of coal car on the Philadelphia and Reading were the class HPA, hopper made by Pullman Standard, and the HKA, hopper with king outlet doors. Although the name says hopper, they were actually hopper bottom gondolas and weren't true self-clearing hopper cars. Virginia Car and Foundry made resin models of both of those classes, the HPA being one of the skinny gons with the same dimensions as the GHA, GMA, and HSA, but with twin hoppers and a different side stake pattern. Sadly, Virginia Car and Foundry is out of business after the passing of one of its partners. I'll most likely have to cast some more of those cars myself in order to have a larger fleet. The HKA is a shorter and wider hopper bottom gon than the HPA. It is also available as a 3D print shell from Shapeways, also by Forbes Models. Obviously, I have a lot of work to do on building many more of those cars, given they represent over 80% of the P&R hopper car fleet. The HS class was really two different cars. The HSA was one of the skinny gons, and the HSB was a series of cars rebuilt from other cars by the Philadelphia and Reading. The HSA can be scratch built from the same side and end castings I made for the GHA, and I have made a master for the single hopper underframe to build HSAs. For the HSB class, I had used an O&W Carworks resin kit as a stand-in. It's only a matter of inches and a couple other minor details from prototype HSB. This brings us to the true hopper cars. In my era, the P&R had three classes of true hoppers, two classes that were steel and one class that was wood. Let's start off with the first class, the steel HTAs. Interestingly, the P&R also went back to wood for an order of 1,000 true hopper cars made out of wood. They built the HTB class, many of which outlasted the original HTA steel cars. My models of those HTBs were also kit badged from a lifelike Barney twin hopper. The holes in the sides underneath the slope sheets were filled in, and then I scribed boards across the sides, retaining the original pressed steel side stakes. This brings us to the last hopper cars that make my era, the HTC. The HTC was from the Standard Steel Car Company. It has alternating channel and angle side stakes. I also kit bashed one from lifelike and Barney twin hopper shells. Westerfield has a resin kit if you prefer those, and I use the Westerfield decals intended for these cars to letter many of my P&R Dons. Well, thanks for listening to my story on how I used research to figure out what my fleet should look like, and then used a variety of kits, kit bashing, and scratch building to get a fleet that is representative of my era and location. Stay safe and keep them painted side up.